joining me today. I was watching the tech people. They were having dinner with Trump the other night and got me thinking about a lot of things. But for today's show, I'm working on several things. The Anti-Defamation League and how they connect to the Ku Klux Klan. Quite a story there. I'm also working on the orphan train update. I have 100% figured out where those poor children came from. And also the show I keep talking about, how did all those people end up moving from Russia into Poland and into Israel to start off that big deception. But the big lie that's in the way, holding all of this together, is that Holocaust. And I have a really long clip. It's around 4 hours. And what my game plan is, I'm going to be talking about the clip and some other things I'm going to talk about today, but I will play the clip after this show airs. So just look for it to show up either later today or first thing tomorrow. I'll just play the whole clip all by itself. And also, along with the clip, I'll give you a link for the video one. I found two sources that have the video of the same clip. I watched both. I listened to the audio first, of course, to make sure it worked for the podcast. And then I also watched the video because I wanted to really grapple it all into my brain. Because first we need to understand that huge lie. But before we get started, I want to come away with a few little details. I love odd details. And have you ever wondered, where did Hitler come up with the idea for that mustache with? Well, I think I got the answer. But before I get started, when I was thinking about those high tech people, I was thinking, there's so much in this word business, right? Like all these what they call white collar people running Silicon Valley. And it's no secret, I worked in Silicon Valley, and that was exactly why I started this work, because by 1999, I had, in fact, after my lawsuit with Intel was completed, and I did prevail, no one thought I would, but I did. And I figured out that Silicon Valley was indeed run by psychopaths. And then I branched out from there. So I have several thoughts because it's also a class thing, right? Those fancy high tech people. So it has to do with this white thing, but it's interesting because some of those tech people aren't white, but you will notice that Trump was sitting right next to Bill Gates on one side and another freak, Mark Zuckerberg, on the other side. So why are white professionals abroad called expats? Well, everyone else gets labeled immigrants or migrants. And what is Mufti? I was looking into the Israel deal and the deal with that land and all that, and this Mufti deal came up. And it is a barn burner, okay? This Mufti deal really exposes that whole plot for that land over in Israel. So Mufti, we'll be talking about that today. And also, when we look at all these high tech people, some of them will brag like Steve Jobs, well, I didn't finish college. And when it happens to one of them, it becomes genius or bravery, right? For a billionaire to say that they dropped out. But what happens with the rest of us? Well, we're looked at completely differently, right? Um, so let's talk a little bit about the high tech self mythology, the eugenics roots. No one likes to mention it. And the pump and dump cycles, Theranos, FTX, and the usual saints of Sand Hill Road. So, you know, they have ways to always make themselves presented as a best light. That is called public relations. That has nothing to do with intelligence, right? They hire good public relations people who pump them up to be these standards of things that everybody should want to go for, right? Oh, look at them. They're all billionaires. They drive around their Teslas. But there's this complete double standard. Like when the elites and these tech people crash a unicorn, they say, well, it's innovation at work. Fail fast. When a working class business folds, they say, well, personal failure. Same risk, different story. Because power always controls the framing. And I have said this for years. Nothing about this is complicated. When this game board was set up, every town got a preacher, a sheriff, and a doctor, and the beat continues. So, there's been all this stuff on social media because everybody's getting caught getting paid off by everybody. I can barely round up $50 a month, and these people are getting millions, right? a few months ago, it was the Tim Pool crowd on the right, I guess. They were getting paid by the Russians. The Russians were loaded with money because they were getting like hundreds of thousands of dollars per upload. That's all they had to do. Upload their normal work and they get paid all this cash, right? And those people ended up getting millions. Well, the left is cheap and chintzy, and they just got busted with dark money. And what they're doing is secretly paying influencers to spread their word. Now, they're only paying people $250 to $8,000 per month. So, but it's all under this thing of being a secret, right? And this is all coming out of how they manipulate the lies. And the big lie that I discovered this week came out of the mouth of Joe Rogan. Now, I was watching Joe Rogan, or I was listening to Joe Rogan and his buddy Tim Dillon speaking on a podcast. I think it was yesterday. And the reason every once in a while, I've listened to two Rogan podcasts from start to finish because, I do study how psychopaths operate. So I'm interested in how they present, how they talk, and all that. But anyway, so because now everybody's in trouble again because the comedians, the people in the Joe Rogan world, got busted because they're going over to Saudi Arabia on this comedy festival and they're getting paid hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars. So it just has been this thing that the left got, first of all, the right got caught taking money from the Russians, the left got caught taking money, dark money, in a secret deal for their influencers. And then the Saudis are doing a comedy festival in the next few days, and they're bringing over all these U.S. comedians. And people are saying, "Hey, wait a minute! Why are you taking money from the Saudis? They're so filthy dirty." All the stuff they do over in Saudi Arabia. And Tim Dillon actually came out and said, "Hey, I'm getting paid a lot of money to look the other way." Well, this is what really sums up our society, right? Just take the money. Doesn't matter. We're in the end chapter of the good battle between good and evil. I don't think taking the money and trying to hide it is probably a good plan. But hey, you do you, right? So anyhow, so long story short, so I'm listening to Rogan and Tim Dillon because I'm kind of interested in what more they have to say about everybody taking all this money, right? So they're going on and on and on. 100% the only reason Joe Rogan exists is to distort history, okay? So they're talking about something I can't remember what. These people actually bore me to daylights, but anyway, I kind of perked up at this point because Rogan says with great authority, you know, why Hitler had that mustache, don't you, Tim? Tim says, no, I have no idea. Well, he wore that mustache because the gas attacks. I thought, wow, is that why? That sounds interesting. I never heard about that mustache. The reason for it, right? So yeah, he said it with such confidence. He said it several times. He said, yeah, he had that specifically styled mustache so that the gas mask would fit around his face better and so they could be protected, right? And that's why he had that mustache. And believe it or not, this mustache also ties to the people with the fez hats because I thought what Rogan was saying sounded kind of crazy, right? Like, what did his mustache have to do with it would make a tighter fit for the gas mask, right? Well, here's the deal. During the Ottoman Empire, 19th century, if it existed or not, it's written in the history book. So let's play along and act like it existed, okay? They had the fez hat, which I've been talking about endlessly, a brimless felt cap. It became a symbol of modernization under Sultan Muhammad II. That was 1820s to the 30s. And he banned the old Ottoman turban for civil servants in the military, pushing the fez first as a modern yet distinctively Ottoman alternative, right? But by the late 1800s, the fez hat had spread across the Middle East, North Africa, and even parts of Europe as a stylish cosmopolitan hat. So for Westerners in the Gilded Age, the fez hat became kind of they wore it in different ways. They wore it openly as Shriners and Masons, and they used it as exotic loungewear as a fashion item, right? But in the late 19th and 20th centuries, European and American high society borrowed turbans as fashion statements. So women in particular were wearing turbans in evenings or artistic settings, drawing on Oriental asceticism. For men in colonial India or the Middle East, turbans carried political, religious, and cultural weight. But in the West, they were exotic accessories symbolizing worldliness. So here's the catch: the mustache that Hitler wears actually has a name. It's called the toothbrush mustache. Okay. And the toothbrush mustache, the fez, and the turban all reflect the Gilded Age drive for newness, modernity, and identity through appearance. And you're thinking, oh, what does a toothbrush mustache like Hitler have to do with the Gilded Age? Well, actually, quite a lot. So, just as the toothbrush mustache represented cleanliness, efficiency, and a break with Victorian excess. So, what happened was prior to the Gilded Age, they all wore these Victorian excess big mustaches and stuff. Just hang in there. This is going to make sense in a second. So, prior to what I'm saying is the takeover, people wore those big, huge, swirly mustaches. Okay. So, but facial hair and headwear became tools to signal belonging to modern industry like mustaches or to a globalizing world like fezzes and those turbans. So, why it mattered? Well, in the late 19th and early 20th century was an era when style choices were political statements. Shave your beard and you become a modern businessman. Wear a fez in Istanbul and you're aligned with Ottoman reform. Adopt a turban in Paris and you're a fashionable, exotic, avant garde person. So, yes, the toothbrush mustache belongs to the same cultural moment as the fez and the turban in the West. Symbols of a world moving away from old traditions into new modern identities, often by borrowing, trimming down, or reshaping older styles. So the claim was that Hitler kept the toothbrush mustache because World War I gas masks required soldiers to trim down those big Kaiser-style mustaches for a proper. Joe Rogan was indicating. Well, the reality is this: that story that Joe Rogan was quoting about the mustache needing to be trimmed for a proper seal on that gas mask, that came from one memoir, a person named Alexander Maurice Frey. But there's no hard proof. All World War I known photos of Hitler already show him with a small mustache. Historians generally say the gas mask theory is possible, but not confirmed. And I would have to say, not even in the same ballpark, okay? And he also made a couple of other false claims. He claimed the Nazis were the first to use gas in warfare. That proves to be false. I've talked about gas endlessly, and that's what got my attention between this mustache lie and when then he followed it up with this lie about the gas, and I knew right off the top of my head that was not true, right? Because poison gas was first used in World War I by Imperial Germany in 1915. They used chlorine gas at Ypres decades before the Nazis. By World War II, chemical weapons were stockpiled but rarely used on the battlefield. So he just made that up. And the part about the other thing, Fritz Haber, he mentioned Fritz Haber was a Jewish German chemist, and he developed the gas poison in World War II and also invented the Haber-Bosch process to fix nitrogen, revolutionizing fertilizer. He did win a Nobel Prize in 1918 for chemistry, and his wife Clara opposed his work and took her own life in 1915. But where does he stretch the truth? Well, Zyklon B, which was used in the death camps, which we're going to be talking about today, wasn't directly his invention. Haber's team worked on Zyklon A as a pesticide. Zyklon B was developed later. And he actually died in 1934 before the Nazis began using it for mass murder. So What Rogan basically did was he blends timelines: World War I, gas warfare, Hitler's mustache, Haber, Zyklon, and Nazi extermination policies into a single narrative. Pieces are true, but strung together loosely, it makes history sound like a simple cause and effect story when it's actually much more complicated. So the bottom line is this: Hitler's mustache as a gas mask adaptation, maybe, but not proven. I would say definitely not true, and I'll be explaining more why. Hitler invented gas warfare. Well, that's false because World War I Germany did. His story about Fritz Haber is true but twisted by Rogan's shorthand. The toothbrush mustache deliberately reads as a deliberate break from late imperial fashion. So, long, sweeping mustaches under Wilhelm Kaiser style in Germany, similarly prominent styles among many Ottoman and other imperial officers, signaled rank, tradition, and elite polish. So that big old mustache was a symbol for elite tradition and polish to begin with, right? But the toothbrush mustache, I don't know why I find this so funny, but I do. But anyways, welcome to my world. I love these little details. So the toothbrush mustache was short, hygienic, and no nonsense, an urban factory age aesthetic. It visually rejected aristocratic flourish. For a German audience in the 1920s to the 30s, Hitler keeping the toothbrush mustache said less Ottoman and more, I'm not of the old court. I'm a hardened frontline soldier, austere and modern. In other words, a brand of rupture from ornate imperial masculinity to stark, disciplined populism. Because pre-World War I, big beards, long mustaches equaled status and tradition. World War I and after, practical trimming and clean-shaven trends rise. Hitler freezes the now dated toothbrush as a trademark, a constant reminder of the trenches, not the salons. So, yes, it's a move away from the fashionable imperial style, just not a signal of Ottoman identity, but of anti aristocratic modernist severity. So, Hitler wanted to capture the working man and woman. So, this anti aristocratic message makes sense. Hitler's entire public image strategy was designed to contrast with the elites of his time. So, yes, the mustache makes perfect sense to me. The Kaiser mustache and aristocratic grooming styles represented the officer class, the Junkers, and the old imperial elite. Hitler's toothbrush mustache looked plain, industrial, almost banal, which made him appear closer to the ordinary worker or soldier. Combined with his cheap suits and stiff posture, it projected an anti-elitist authenticity. Hitler's propaganda constantly hammered on his World War I veteran identity, the frontline soldier who suffered alongside ordinary men. The toothbrush mustache was already old-fashioned by the 1930s, but it became a living fossil of the trenches, a reminder that he was forged in war, not born into privilege. This helped him connect with veterans, laborers, and the disillusioned middle class. While aristocrats leaned on uniforms, medals, and ceremony, Hitler's plain, even awkward mustache began a brand of accessibility. He turned what could have been a liability, an odd, unfashionable look, into a calling card that every German could recognize instantly. In effect, he was saying, I am not one of them. I am one of you. And this is exactly the same drill going on today. All these people taking money are all yelling, oh, I had to take the money, or hey, I'm really one of you. Hey, none of these people are one of us. Stop giving them that high ground. So, yes, his choice to stick with the toothbrush mustache fits perfectly with his strategy to capture the working man and woman is a visual populism, a way to erase aristocratic distance and make his face a symbol of struggle, simplicity, and most importantly, of the people. So, yeah, I want to talk just a brief amount because we're going to be talking about the same people who set up these camps I'll be talking about today. These horrible, horrible camps. To deny the Holocaust does not mean that people did not die. What it means in my world is it's not the story that we have been told. But we have a lot of broken people in power right now. They're broken people. Most of them are on drugs, even testosterone, and wanting to murder every single one of us. Does everyone in this world also have Stockholm syndrome? What is the power beneath these people? Why do people continue to fawn over them? That is the big question for me, because even after all these people get caught in this big fallout going on now, how many of them are going to really pay the price? How many of them are going to really lose their audiences and their funding? I think it's going to go back to business as usual because I think, and I'm just going to be sharing what I've been thinking about for a very long time. I think that what the world has right now is closer to Stockholm syndrome. That's exactly what I think is going on. Somebody recently, um, I posted something online. I posted a picture of Whitney Webb, Whitney Webb, the little liar. I posted a picture of her, and under it, I did not rage. I did not make any bold statements. I simply posted her family background information so anyone could click on that link and go looky for themselves. So, what did somebody say to me? Some regular person, they said, this was their exact quote: Jesus, can't you leave Whitney Webb alone? Almost like they're Whitney Webb's agent, right? Well, that is how people respond to these people because many powerful figures, politicians, military brass, executives have well documented histories of heavy drinking, stimulants, and other substances. In World War II, for example, Hitler was pumped full of methamphetamine and opiates. Churchill drank daily. U.S. generals routinely used pep pills. Addiction at the top isn't just personal weakness, it's also woven into a culture of stress, control, and unprocessed trauma. Every one of the 1% have had their brains split to traumatize themselves into being psychopaths. These are the people ruling things. Most of the power elite power is built on systems of domination, war making, and control over populations. When leaders treat people as numbers, targets, or resources, their worldview edges closer to psychopathy. From the outside, it feels like a death drive, policies and wars that destroy millions, while leaders seem detached from the human cost. So, why do I think it's Stockholm Syndrome? Well, I think it's Stockholm Syndrome on a massive scale. Stockholm Syndrome is when victims begin to identify with or defend their captors. On a societal scale, you can see echoes of this: citizens defending policies that actively harm them. People idolize billionaires or politicians who exploit them. Media narratives painting powerful abusers as protectors or necessary evils. It's not just individual weakness, it's conditioning. If you're told from birth that your survival depends on trusting authority, it's very hard to break free. So, why do people defend their abusers? Well, because fear. Believing the system is broken is terrifying. It feels safer to pretend it's okay. Dependency, jobs, food, safety nets are tied to institutions, even corrupt ones. Propaganda, constant messaging equates loyalty with morality and doubt with treason or insanity. Isolation, when you question power, you can be marginalized, which pushes many back into compliance. It does look like mass Stockholm syndrome. People cling to their abusers, be they leaders, corporations, or systems, because breaking that bond would mean facing the raw truth that those in power may not just be imperfect, but they're actively destructive of the rest of us. So, let's talk about some of these things that I'm going to be going into later. I have several files that I'm working on, and I have like four that I've got to get through after today's show to put all this into perspective. And then I can get back to their day to day crimes, and I have a pile of those. So we have all these fraternal and racial politics. I figured out the flag for the Civil War was in fact from the Scottish Rite. We had the Ku Klux Klan and later the Anti-Defamation League. Both arose from historical traumas, including this really crazy legal case that can point back directly to them. We have Jewish self-defense and institutions. We have Jewish mobsters. They formed an underground defense while the ADL became an official shield. Yeah, we have that B'nai B'rith. They reshaped Catholic-Jewish relations. And while the Romanovs ruled Russia, while the Habsburg intermarriages redrew European monarchies, displacement of Crusacian and Armenian dovetailed with Jewish migrations from Russia and Poland into Israel and the United States. Because I've got those will be four shows that I have coming up as soon as I can grab a breath and take care of them. And that will lay the groundwork to where we are today. But I wanted to reel it back a little bit for this big Holocaust lie because part of this Holocaust lie includes this very strange deal with this Mufti deal. And I was reading along and I thought, Mufti, what are these people talking about now? Well, Mufti is how they rigged the whole thing back up in the early days of Palestine. So that will make sense in a second. Because the documentary, which will play after the show, explains how the German wartime camps at Treblinka, Sobibor, and Belzec were all in Poland. They were not death camps as is usually claimed. The clip debunks one-third of the Holocaust. The movie asks questions like, would the Germans have really put a fence made out of tree branch around a death camp? Answer is no, that's silly. And why would they have conducted a large burning operation inside this flammable fence? Operation Reinhard was a code name for Nazi Germany's plan to systematically murder Jews in occupied Poland. It involved three extermination or killing centers, Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka, between 1942 and 1943. Roughly 1.5 to 1.7 million Jews were supposedly killed there. These sites were intentionally built and operated for mass murder using carbon monoxide gas with support from Nazi machinery and ideologues. So here's how I found this whole thing to begin with. In my usual hunting around, I found this interesting interview with this person named Ephraim Kaye, Kaye. So let me just read this article to put this all into perspective. This is an interview with Ephraim Kaye, a director at Yad Vashem Holocaust Museum in Israel, using classic Orwellian doublethink, in which he attempts to explain how the complete lack of physical evidence to support the official Holocaust narrative is actually proof that the Holocaust happened. So, in essence, this Ephraim K person, he's admitting that Holocaust denial is completely rational. This complete lack of physical evidence requires an extraordinary leap of faith to believe it happened. And yet, they have thrown many people in jail and continue to do so for not going along with Kai's implausible explanation as to why there is no evidence to support this event, which Kai himself describes as unbelievable. So let's listen to his words. Essentially, Holocaust denial is part and parcel of the history of the Holocaust itself, as the Nazis perpetrated against the Jews during World War II. And what do I mean? I'm going to give you a few examples. The most glaring, blatant example of the largest death camp Auschwitz-Birkenau, or Auschwitz, as the Germans call it, where this is a death camp. That began its killing operations in March 1942, and to continue to murder people until November 1944, when the facility was closed down because the Russians were getting too close. During that 2.5 years, it's anywhere between 1.2 and 1.4 million people were murdered. 90% were Jews. And the chilling fact is when you come back and you visit that facility, having been there 18 or 19 times with different groups, IDF officers, educators, and you walk around the camp, which is geographically is a tremendous area. It has 60,000 permanent prisoners at any given time. And you walk around and you look for the physical evidence of the destruction of 1.2 to 1.4 million people. What's distressing and depressing is that you really don't find it. You don't find mountains of clothing of victims that arrived there. You don't find mountains of ashes and bones. It was taken in trucks and dumped in the Vistula River or the swamp around Auschwitz. You don't see the actual buildings of the crematoria or gas chambers. They were blown up by the Germans before they retreated in 1945. And so you come to a death camp facility and essentially you walk away to think something very sterile. You don't actually see with your own eyes, hands, smell, touch the actual discretion process. If I go take you back to a place called Treblinka, one of the smallest death camps, where between 22nd of July 1942 and the 2nd of August 1943, it's estimated that 900,000 Jews were murdered in those 13 months at Treblinka. And so you go back and visit this death camp. Unbelievable, there was nothing there. Well, there is something there today. In 1960, the Polish government created a very moving memorial of 17,000 stones that they dispersed in the entire area where the camp originally was. And on the stones, they engineered the names of Jewish communities that were sent to Treblinka and destroyed there. Isn't that very convenient? They did that exactly at all these tourist attractions, right? Well, if you would have been here 500 years ago, this would have been a fabulous castle over here. Just fabulous, I'm telling you. But here we have some rocks on the ground. Now go over to the gift shop over there. We've reconstructed things. You can buy your drawings. But when you look for physical evidence, there is nothing there because before that camp was closed down, by the way, because of a Jewish prisoner revolt on the 2nd of August, 1943, but in the spring of 1943, there was no crematoria at Treblinka. There were no gas chambers. Bodies were buried in tremendously deep graves that were dug up by steam shovels at Treblinka. Himmler gave an order to dig everything up, destroy everything, and disperse it in the entire area, which was done. And Jewish prisoners had to do this work. And so a person visits today Treblinka and sees nothing. A person visits Belzec or Klimlan and Sobibor and the same thing. Hundreds and thousands of Jews were murdered in those death camps, and you can't see anything. Beyond that, if I go back to places where shooting operations took place, not gassing operations, places like Babi Yar, where we know there were 30,000 Jews were murdered there in the end of September 1941, all close together, close to 60,000 Jews in 41 and 42 were murdered in Babi Yar. And you go back there and check and you dig it up, you should find some physical evidence, bodies, bones, something that didn't disappear. It's not there because it was all dug up by a special top secret operation commanded by SS Paul Biblio called 1005, personally created by Himmler in the spring of 1942. Think about that. The Germans, at the height of military superiority in 1942, and they decide to go back and clean up the mess they made. They went back to Babi Yar. They went back to Rumba Forest near Riga. They went back to the 7th and ninth Fort near Kovna. They went back to Pornoy near Bibla, where tens of thousands of Jews had been murdered in 1942 and 41. They dug it up, cleaned it out, disappeared. As we have previously reported, at the alleged height of the killing operation in 1943, the Jewish press published a cover story explaining why there would be no physical evidence of any mass murders of Jews at the end of the war, excuse me. In other words, Jews had already committed to the Holocaust narrative so as to justify the establishment of Israel. But because they made it all up with the help of Academy Award-winning screenwriter Bill Hecht, there wasn't going to be any physical evidence to support such a far-fetched scenario. Even leading Zionists like Rabbi Stephen Weiss and Jewish Supreme Court Justice Felix Frankfurter didn't initially believe any of the Jewish-generated atrocity propaganda. But they created a serious credibility problem. Why would the uber-rational and efficient Germans, at the height of their strength, believing they would probably win the war and have nothing to hide, waste valuable manpower and material support to hide the evidence of mass murder? It makes no sense, and the Jews know it. But instead of admitting the obvious, they double down on this absurdity. Both Auschwitz and Treblinka were built in swampy areas where the water table was very high. If you attempted to dig a mass grave, as Ephraim Case contends, it would immediately fill with water. And if the Germans merely threw millions of tons of clothing into the Vistula River, that evidence could be easily dredged up today, but never has been because it just is not there. Just like they won't dredge the Danube River for the alleged tens of thousands of shoes to confirm the mass murder of Jews in Hungary, because it never happened. And there is no evidence of mass murder at Treblinka for a very simple reason. It was a transit camp, not a death camp with gas chambers. According to these ridiculous Jewish eyewitnesses, the Germans used a diesel-powered submarine engine from a Soviet submarine to gas the Jews at Treblinka. But they didn't realize that diesel exhaust is not poisonous enough to kill people in gas chambers or anywhere. So this is where I found out the name of this documentary. They went on to say, watch the brilliant documentary 1/3 of the Holocaust, which completely dismantles and destroys any notion that Treblinka, Belzec, or Sobibor were death camps with gas chambers, or that the Germans could have cleaned up the mess there. There is no physical evidence of the Holocaust for a very simple reason. It did not happen. And this was written by a Christian group. So what they said, and why is this important for Christians to understand? The Jews are using this fake Holocaust narrative to replace the suffering of Christ on the cross with the suffering of the Jews at the hands of Christians in death camps, so that we repent of our Christian anti-Semitism and worship the Antichrist Jews instead of Christ. Well, I don't know, but you'll find interesting views. The Christians are all over this. The death camps aren't real stuff. So you'll find a lot of, and this is the one I mentioned. I have circled World War II for literally years now. I used to watch any World War II document. I used to think documentaries were true, right? So I used to watch any documentary that ever came out about World War II. For some reason, now it's becoming clear, but for some reason, I've just intuitively been circling this drain for a very long time. And this psyops really got me because this was the one when Eisenhower forced all those German people to walk past those atrocities, and thinking it was all true certainly twisted my thinking, not in a negative way towards the Germans, but it's well, looking at them with suspicion. Okay, so what they did was by lying to the Germans, we were also deceived. It said, but psyops Psyopses were also aligned directly to American citizens as well by portraying Germans as evil Huns to the American public. So we would keep up our fighting morale by psychological warfare operatives rationalizing our own American atrocities, like the firebombing of Dresden or nuclear attacks against civilians in Japan, and by psychological warfare operatives clearly hiding the fact that Judeo-Soviet Russians, our allies, had committed the Khatynate Forest massacre, so we would keep them as an ally, or that the Russians themselves had invaded Poland the same time Germany did. When the first camps were discovered, the first thing General Eisenhower did was have a psyops led by and a biased Jew whose very job title was liar when they entered the compound. The psyops planted fake evidence of Nazi atrocities, like fake lampshades made of human skin and shrunken heads from South America. This had to have been a pre-planned psyops operation and was already screenplayed by Ben Hecht, excuse me, that's Ben Hecht. The water supply had been cut off weeks before American troops arrived, and in the unwashed, filthy conditions with a cut off food supply, typhus had ravaged the camp, killing many. Among the living skeletons when we arrived, we gave them too rich a diet, too fast, and many died that way as well. We killed thousands of them. And I used to wonder if they did that on purpose. I think they did that on purpose because when somebody's been starving to death, you don't rush in and give them a whole bunch of food. So they actually, I'll keep reading here. The 1,000 dead bodies from our overfeeding were stacked up as evidence of German atrocities. The film documentary from Hollywood producer Billy Wilder shows the bodies being stacked like cordwood in front of American troops, so it was us who stacked them. Eisenhower then had the town of Weimar march 4 miles to the camp with a film crew showing the march. Not knowing where they were going, the film crew was able to crack a joke or catcall the pretty German girls to get the ladies to smile and laugh for the camera. And that was pretty clever because when you saw those German people like laughing it up, you started to think, oh, wow, this is pretty cruel, right? They're laughing, right? I'll just keep reading here. Of course, that was to be used against them later. The film crew documented, quote unquote, the German citizens seeing the stacked bodies and the fake action of atrocities and documented the German now crime. The complete documentary, the first Holocaust movie, was directed by Billy Wilder, a biased Jewish Hollywood producer born and raised in Germany who left Germany from a hatred of Hitler. So, these were built on purpose for mass this but anyways, all of these were located in German occupied Poland, okay? And I have all of the details on my website down below, and these six are recognized as the main Nazi extermination camps, and they were all in occupied Poland. Well, gee, wonder why that is, right? Why were they all in Poland? Don't know yet, but anyway, so the concentration and labor camps were spread across Europe, not just Poland. They were primarily for forced labor, imprisonment of political opponents, POWs, Romas, Jews, and others. But mass deaths from starvation, disease, and execution was also common. So they had a bunch of camps. The first one was Dachau in Germany, was the first concentration camp in 1933. Then we had Buchenwald. I have the whole list down below. There's no reason for me to stumble through and pronounce it poorly. So anyway, uh, these camps aren't what people were saying they were. So all extermination camps built solely for mass killings were in occupied Poland. Concentration, labor, and transit camps existed all over Nazi-occupied Europe, Germany, Austria, France, Netherlands, Chechnya, etc. And those camps were set up so these people were all forced labor at all those camps. So yeah, they didn't send them all off to be killed immediately. A lot of them went into forced labor. So by 1939, after the invasion of Poland, the largest Jewish population in Europe lived in Poland, about 3 million Jews. Extermination camps were placed close to the source populations, so deportations were shorter, cheaper, and easier to organize. Poland also sat at the crossroads of occupied Europe, making it a hub for deporting Jews from Germany, France, the Netherlands, Hungary, and elsewhere. Poland was under direct German occupation, stripped of sovereignty. Nazi officials had far more freedom there to establish secretive facilities than in Germany itself. In contrast, Germany was more visible to international observers and neutral powers. The Nazis were careful to keep the worst atrocities out of sight of the German public and potential foreign scrutiny. Camps in Poland were remote, rural, and easier to hide from the German public. Few foreign journalists or diplomats had access to occupied Poland, unlike Germany's core territory. The Nazis actively used propaganda to hide the scale of the final solution, so placing death camps far away helped maintain secrecy. Poland already had a vast rail network that could be adapted for mass deportation. Cities like Lublin, Warsaw, and Krakow were connected to the wider European railway system, making it easier to move people from access across occupied Europe directly into the camps. Nazi ideology regarded Poland and Eastern Europe as a colonial frontier, a place to be Germanized and cleared of its existing populations. Establishing extermination centers there aligned with their broader plan to depopulate and reorganize Eastern Europe for German settlement. Yeah, I think all these plans are very true because they did not plan on losing that war, okay? And using Polish soil symbolically reinforced the Nazi idea that Jews were Eastern outsiders who should be destroyed there rather than in the heart of Germany. So why are they calling them Eastern outsiders? Huh, anything to do with those Romanovs up in Russia? In short, the Nazis put extermination camps in occupied Poland because it was logistically convenient, proximity to Jewish populations, railways, politically easier, less scrutiny, and ideologically consistent with their colonial vision of Eastern Europe. So, drafted primarily by the SS and Heinrich Himmler's planning office in 1939 to 1942, it was a long-term blueprint for German colonization of Eastern Europe after a Nazi victory in World War II. The plan envisioned a racial reordering of Europe, not just eliminating Jews, but also Poles, Ukrainians, Belarusians, Russians, and other Slavic people who were considered subhuman by Nazi ideology. Tens of millions of Slavs were to be expelled beyond the Ural Mountains into a reservation. Food resources of Eastern Europe would be diverted to Germany, deliberately causing famine among local populations, and they called that the Hunger Plan. Jews were targeted for extermination. Slavic elites, the teachers, clergy, and political leaders, were to be executed to prevent resistance. German colonization, vast tracts of Poland, Ukraine, and Russia were to be cleared for German settlers. Himmler envisioned creating a chain of German farmsteads, towns, and highways to Germanize the East over decades. A number of children with Aryan features would be kidnapped and raised as Germans. The rest were marked for enslavement or deportation. This plan was only partially implemented because the Nazis never conquered the Soviet Union as they planned. The turning point was Germany's defeat at Stalingrad, 1942 to 43, and later at Kursk, 1943. With the Red Army pushing westward, Nazi resources were redirected to survival, not long-term colonization projects. I think it's just as simple as this. They were sitting around too high on speed or whatever these people take, and they come up with these grand illusions. Speed and all of that stuff is exactly what creates this kind of thinking. So, um, some elements were carried out. They did get rid of some of the Poles. They did starve some of the Soviets. They did kidnap an estimated 200,000 Polish children for Germanization. But the grand vision, tens of millions resettled and replaced by Germans, never happened because the war turned against Germany. When the Allies discovered Nazi planning documents in 1945, they were shocked. It shocked even hardened investigators. No, I'm sure it did. Historians today see it as evidence that the Holocaust was just one part of a broader genocidal strategy aimed not only at Jews, but also at remaking all of Eastern Europe into a racial empire. It has been compared to colonial settler projects like Manifest Destiny in the US or European colonization overseas, but far more ruthless and industrialized. So, this plan was a long term Nazi plan to wipe out or enslave tens of millions of Eastern Europeans and replace them with German settlers. It was only partially carried out because Germany lost the war, but elements like mass starvation, deportations, and child kidnappings did in fact occur. So, what are they talking about when they're talking about Eastern Europe? Well, I'm kind of a dumbbell, so I had to look it up. Countries lying to the east of Central Europe. That would be countries like Belarus, Bulgaria, Chechnya, Hungary, Moldova, Poland, Romania, Slovakia, and Ukraine. But during the Cold War, they called Eastern Europe usually meant the Warsaw Pact countries dominated by the USSR. That would be East Germany, now part of Germany, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, and Albania. So yeah, they were doing a lot of shifting around. Um, so, why were they over trying to kill all the people in that area? Well, we'll have to kind of get back to that later because it's still kind of a mystery to me. Because for some reason, I thought the war was about killing the Jews, but it seems to me like it was about conquering Eastern Europe. So I'm still just tiny bit fuzzy here. So, so what did I find? Well, I have all of the lists down below. I'm not going to read them all to you, but it's kind of when they make these border name changes and stuff, it makes it hard to look up these different times. So you always have to look at the timeline and what were they called back then, right? Um, and let me see. I believe at its peak before World War I, the Romanov Empire stretched from Poland to the Pacific Ocean, including parts of Central Asia, the Caucasus, and Siberia. In Eastern Europe, the Romanovs controlled most of the Slavic lands east of Germany and Austria-Hungary. The only real Eastern European lands they didn't hold were Chechnya, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria. So inside Romanov control, then we had Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, Poland, Moldova. So we got the Romanovs are right here in the middle of this whole thing, right? Because the Romanovs supposedly got killed off right around World War One period, 1917. So, but interesting enough, this was all the area they controlled. So let's get to this. And so that part of this movement, the East, I have no answers for that. I'm just trying to absorb it myself right now. So granted, I'll come back with things like the last show. I mentioned something about the calendar changed, and I forgot to mention it. Well, I'll circle back to those things. I'm sure I'll be circling back to this Eastern Europe part. I'm not done there. Just like I never got done with those orphan train kids. So anyway, let me see. There was this guy. I don't know why Netanyahu picked some guy to head the Holocaust. These museums hold a lot of this power, okay, because they hold the supposed artifacts and stuff. And the name of the Holocaust Museum established in Jerusalem that you're looking for is called Yad, Y-A-D, Vashem, Vashem. It's a world-renowned Holocaust museum established in Jerusalem, and that has bolstered Israel's claim to act as guardian and interpreter of the lessons of the Nazi genocide that destroyed much of European Jewry during the Second World War. Before the pandemic, more than 1 million visitors passed annually through its doors, and the museum was considered an all but mandatory stop for world leaders visiting Israel. Yeah, packed full of lies, right? It was research by Vlad Vashim's distinguished historians has guided other museums, oh, of course it has, and research institutes around the world in how they understand and present the Holocaust. The museum stages influential conferences for scholars and producers key texts. Yeah, of course they do. That's where the control is, right? So I have some, they appointed some guy who was problematic, not that interested today. Let me get down to this Mufti business. This Mufti business is much better. So yeah, because Netanyahu wanted to plan to put some guy in charge of the Holocaust Museum, and they all do crazy things. I can't cover every crazy thing they do, so let me scroll down to the good part, the Mufti business. So I was looking around at pictures. Now there is this person, and I got to scroll back here because I scrolled down too far. Uh, okay, where'd this Mufti guy? Let me see here. Okay, I found this picture. Okay, and the picture in question shows this person Hajj Ahmed Al Hussein is called the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, and he was meeting with Adolf Hitler in Berlin on November the 28th, 1941. So all I saw was this one picture when I was roaming around, right? And I thought, what the heck is going on here? What is a muftah, and why is this person standing next to Hitler in Jerusalem? So why was Hitler in Jerusalem, right? So it's amazing what you could take from one little thing, right? I uncovered that whole Crusacian thing just by one thing I read about in Ottoman. I read they were selling white slave women in Turkey, and that led me all the way through this whole this whole thing with these urban kids, orphan train kids. So you never know where one picture takes you, right? And this one ended up being a gold mine. So anyway, so I find this picture of this guy, and he's called the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, and he's standing there in a picture with Adolf Hitler in Berlin. And I'm thinking, why is the guy from Israel, what's a mufti, and why is he in Berlin meeting with Hitler, right? So what happened was this. Al Husseini, the mufti guy, fled Palestine after the failed Arab revolt in 1936 to 1939 and spent World War II in Axis territory. He collaborated with Nazi Germany, broadcasting propaganda to the Arab world and recruiting Muslims for SS units in the Balkans. So, what happened was there was right-wing Israeli voices, and they want Yad Yazim, the museum, to highlight the Mufti Hitler meeting as central to Holocaust history, portraying Palestinians as co-conspirators in the genocide. And I still don't get why some of this makes sense, okay? So this person, Danny Dayan, this was a person that Bibi Netanyahu, I got down this rabbit hole because I saw a picture of Bibi giving some guy a new job at this museum, and then I ran into a picture of the guy at the museum. Anyway, so let me try to keep it straight here. So what happened was these people wanted to include this Mufti Hitler meeting in the Holocaust Museum, okay, as part of the history. And this person, Danny Dayan, and some historians argue that while the Mufti was clearly an anti-Semite and Nazi collaborator, his role in shaping or executing the Holocaust itself was marginal compared to decisions already being made by Nazi leadership. So, Critics of this Dayan person say, it's Dayan, say minimizing the Mufti's role whitewashes Arab-Palestinian involvement in Nazi ideology. They point out that his advocacy against Jewish immigration to Palestine during the Holocaust, which may have contributed to Jews being trapped in Europe. They stress that he actively promoted extermination policies in meetings with Himmler and other Nazi leaders. So, yeah, of course, this Mufti person is 100% a controlled opposition person, right? So, some argue the Holocaust was conceived and carried out by Nazi Germany, regardless of the Mufti. So, historians, including the Yad Yazmir group, classify al Hussein's influence as propaganda and symbolic support, not policy shaping. They emphasize the risk of turning Holocaust education into a political weapon against Palestinians today, distorting responsibility. So, this is what the records say. According to Yad Vashim's, the museum's own archives and mainstream Holocaust research, they say this Mufti person, okay, which was in there from the very beginning, the Mufti supported the final solution, but he did not originate it. He lobbied against Jewish refugees escaping to Palestine. He collaborated in propaganda and helped recruit troops for the Waffen SS. There is no evidence he influenced Hitler's decision to launch the extermination program, which was already in motion by late 1941. The debate isn't just about history, it's about how Israel frames Palestinian history in relationship to the Holocaust. Right-wing groups emphasize the Mufti to portray Palestinians as historically complicit in Nazi crimes. Others, like Dayan, worry that inflating his role undermines scholarly credibility and turns Yad Vashem Museum into a tool of present-day politics. They claim the Mufti of Jerusalem was a Nazi collaborator and propagandist who met Hitler in 1941. But historians generally agree his role in the Holocaust decision-making was marginal. The controversy is less about history, and it's about how Israel uses Holocaust memory in today's political conflict. So, who or what is this Mufti? A Mufti is a Muslim legal scholar who interprets Islamic law, Sharia, and issues religious rulings or fatwas. The Grand Mufti of Jerusalem was the highest Islamic authority in mandatory Palestine, especially in the 1920s to 40s under British control. The most famous figure with this title was Hajj Amin al-Hussein. He lived from 1847 to 1974. He was appointed the Grand Mufti by the British High Commissioner in 1921. He became a political and religious leader of Palestinian Arabs. He was known for fierce opposition to Zionism and British colonial rule. Well, of course he was, right? So they say that this Mufti person who was Al Hussein in Nazi Germany, after the failed 1936 to 39 Arab revolt in Palestine, Al Hussein fled British authority. By 1941, he made his way to Berlin, and that's where he took that picture. He met Adolf Hitler, Foreign Ministry Håkon Ribbentrop, and SS Chief Heinrich Himmler. Let me see, wait a second. He sought German and Italian support for Arab independence and to block Jewish immigration to Palestine. He did propaganda. He broadcast Nazi propaganda in Arabic via radio, urging Arabs to oppose the Allies and reject Jewish settlement. He portrayed World War II as a war against Jews and colonial power. He helped recruit Muslims for Waffen SS divisions in the Balkans. He expressed explicit support for the Nazi extermination of Jews. Evidence shows he lobbied German officials to prevent Jewish refugees from escaping to Palestine. So they generally agree that he did not influence the design of the Holocaust. Well, I could have even said that, but he was a willing propagandist and collaborator once it was underway. So after the war, al-Hussein, or the Mufti, flew to France, then Cairo. He remained a symbol of Palestinian nationalism until his death in 1974. His Nazi connections left a deep stain, and Israeli Western politicians frequently invoke his meeting with Hitler to discredit Palestinian nationalism. So a Mufti is a Islamic legal scholar. The Grand Mufti of Jerusalem was the chief Muslim cleric in Palestine. Hajj Amit al-Hussein, the Mufti in question, did meet Hitler in 1945. He did collaborate with the Nazis, spread propaganda, and recruited troops. Historians agree he was a Nazi ally and propagandist, but his role, yeah, I think they're saying, well, yeah, he did all these things, but he didn't really come up with it all. So, uh, yeah, this Mufti guy, Al Hussein, was born in Jerusalem into a prominent Palestinian Arab family, studied in Cairo, serves briefly in the Ottoman army in World War I, helps organize anti-Jewish Zionist riots in Jerusalem. He was sentenced to 10 years by the British, pardoned after 1 year. 1921, appointed Grand Mufti of Jerusalem by the British High Commissioner, partly to secure Arab support. So yeah, they consolidate power through the 20s and 30s, plays a leading role in the. Yeah, I think this guy was just a leading, what we consider today controlled opposition. And I have all of his information down below, but they say that the Mufti was absolutely a man with a mission, one driven by opposition to Zionism, and his pursuit of that mission led him into an alliance with Nazi Germany, forever staining his legacy. No, I just think they found part of the truth about it with what they did. So he looked like control opposition to me. He was appointed by the British Mufti. He was the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. This gave him immense religious and political authority, despite being a relatively young cleric with a record of incitement. Yeah, he was the guy they put in place there. Okay, uh, after the 36 to 39 Arab revolt collapsed in disaster, tens of thousands of Arabs were killed, leaders were exiled, infrastructure was destroyed. Some historians argue that al Hussein's, or the Mufti guy, leadership weakened the Palestinian cause at a critical moment. Yeah, that's exactly how it works, leaving them fragmented when Israel was founded in 1948. So, yeah, this Mufti person really played a pretty big role, and I think he was for sure controlled opposition. So, I think that early on they were just learning some of these controlled opposition tricks. I don't think it was any more complicated than that. Um, rather than being strictly controlled opposition, he might be a useful enemy. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of reasons, but I think the controlled opposition theory works. He was elevated by the British, centralized resistance, but often in ways that weakened the Palestinian position. His actions were driven by real convictions and often clashed with British and Zionist plans. Yeah, we all agree and disagree on many things, right? Hajj Amin al Hussein wasn't a puppet in the strictest sense, but his extremism and miscalculations made him a useful enemy. Yeah, I think that's exactly how they set up that region by bringing this guy in and lining with Hitler. There's more about this picture with this Mufti guy, but I don't know what it is, right? Because I think it's this: the British Empire and other colonial powers didn't yet have the perfect toolkit of Cold War style intelligence operations. Their approach to opposition was more blunt: co opt some leaders, exile or crush others, play factions off one another. With the Mufti of Jerusalem, the British did both. They gave him power in 1921 with an appointment, but they also reined him in or exiled him when he pushed too far. Now, when they exile these people or they kill them all, they basically get a new a new history, a new face, and they travel off to some other place. So what I'm going to be doing is closing off here because I need to close this off. And let me see here. I'm going to be playing the audio version that will play after this show, not today. I'll upload either tonight or tomorrow, okay? If you prefer to watch it, I have I'll have links for you to watch it when I play it tomorrow. I also have the links there today. So because there's a lot of gaps in the audio version, but I did both of them. I liked both of them. I started off with the audio version first, and I like to just kind of sit and focus, and I watch my breathing, and I stay focused on what I'm doing and stuff. I like that kind of commitment to learning things, right? So then I also watched it because I really wanted to understand it better. So I'm not saying a lot of people didn't die, likely more than we're ever going to know. But what this shows me is this lie about those camps and their big deception about the Holocaust. It was always about robbery and murder. Lots lost their lives and their entire family history and farms and land. But we need to keep the record straight. It didn't happen the way that they claim, and they need laws to toss us in jails to protect these same lies. So yeah, they've come up with this big lie about the Holocaust. Yeah, a lot of people got murdered. I'm not brushing off any of that stuff, but the facts remain the facts. How they told the story was not true. They made up a script for this story, and this is exactly what this whole game board is. One big script. They started off with that Bible to anchor the script. They brought in the historian. So this is a game board. Make your moves accordingly. I'll be back with the ADA and that KKK business and all that other strange stuff that I have going on to talk to you about. So in the meantime, remember, this is only a game board. Keep your senses about you. Get some sun, get some sleep, be safe out there, and I'll chat with you later. Goodbye for now.